Hi, I'm Mackenzie Mauss, and I read The Desert and the Sea by Michael Scott Moore, and I will present the book through the lens of reflective believing. So, basic summary, it is a captivating story about Michael Scott Moore, who is a US German journalist, traveled to Somalia in order to write about the uprising and history of piracy. But then in January of 2012, he's actually abducted by Somali pirates and is held captive for 977 days. And he spends his time shuffling from ship to land, interacting with various pirates and other captives from all over the world. It really is a story of the human will to live and ultimately the need to move beyond yourself in order to find joy in the most dire of circumstances. And I think the fact that he was a journalist and he's able to recall and kind of keep these memories, he's able to write a lot as well as keep his mind as sharp as he could. And so it's just a beautifully written autobiography of this experience. What really struck out to me is he consistently put his experience in that moment into dialogue with his own personal canon, allowing him to make some sense of the situation. And really, he is practicing reflective believing. Whether or not he would say that he was, he definitely is. So, what is reflective believing? It attends to the now while processing past experiences to spark reflecting and to put the past and the present in dialogue with some kind of religious heritage or personal canon in the process of meaning making. And this is reflective believing is presented by Foley, and he kind of came to this with the idea that theological reflection really is through the lens of Christianity and ultimately the Roman Catholic Church. And reflective believing is kind of opening up that circle to engage with thoughts and perspectives outside of our little Catholic world. And so really it works out well for Scott Moore, because he engages with countless readers. And I'll come up to that here in a little bit. But Foley offers 23 rules to help understand RB as a process of meaning making. And in these rules, I think one of the things that's important to note is that it is not theistic. Instead, it offers a new language game that can engage people of all backgrounds and perspectives. And he really focuses on the fact that it requires humility to not look at the world from a point of certitude, but instead from a point of growth and engagement. And you'll see that this plays a huge role in Michael's story as well. But it's just this idea that you have to be able to listen to outside perspectives in order to grow within your own. And he also insists that RB invites a balance between what is known with the head and through the body with deep feelings of heart knowledge. And so what this really means is that what one is feeling deep in their heart, RB can help you put it in dialogue with what is known and what can be learned. And so really, Michael had 977 days to just sit and think with his own thoughts and reflect. And throughout his time as a prisoner, he recalls countless authors, books, quotes, poems, interviews from his own journaling experience and his childhood to help him keep a sound mind, but also just to kind of help him orient himself in where he is in life. And he also uses yoga and journaling to help focus his feelings and not just spiral down to despair, but instead kind of lead him to detachment, which again, I will talk about. But also, although he had renounced his Catholic upbringing, he wanted to focus more on his worldly ambitions and interactions. He remained open to the church's wisdom. And I have a really great example of just kind of how he was able to humble himself from what he thought he knew and instead allow an opportunity to learn. And so one night, about a year and a half into his captivity, he overheard Pope Francis actually on the radio. And he heard Pope Francis say, "At night we look at the sky and we see many stars. But when the sun rises in the morning, the light is such that we can't see the stars. God's mercy is like that, a great light of love and tenderness." And somehow these words transformed his entire outlook. He had been grappling with immense guilt for having put his mother and friends through this experience. He had intense negative feelings bubbling inside of him with no release. But Pope Francis's words liberated these feelings, culminating in what he could only express as gratitude. And I just want to share a quote, an insert from the book, because I think it really explains how he was doing reflective believing without even knowing. So in the book, Moore states, after hearing this quote, "In spite of my nasty circumstances, it struck me as basically good that I hadn't drowned myself off the ship. Therefore, I shouldn't kill myself now. All the personalities, from Epictetus to Promodia, from Thich Quang Duc to Derek Walcott, who had sustained me so far, these different ideas of liberation from the self seemed to congeal in the Pope's image of the sun, and a strange feeling of gratitude spread in my blood. I had nothing but a quiet throb of life, which itself was a gift. Like the power of thought and the simple poetry in the Pope's words unfastened something, so I could feel how bitterness and anger were acts of will, like suffering itself, and how a slight step backward, an unhooking of the mind, could let in a flood of mercy and light. So really what he's saying is he had been engaging with all these different voices and personalities, and they had helped sustain him and liberate him from these negative feelings. And because he remained open to other people's thoughts, hearing the Pope's words, despite not being Catholic, like I like how they use the word liberated him from these negative feelings in order to understand that there is some goodness in his situation. I mean, he's alive, and there's a gratitude in that. He was able to humble himself to understand that, and I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And so in the end, how does he make sense of it all? He's ultimately released. In 2014, and I think it's important to note that Dr. Hunt mentions doing like theological reflection without the theological aspect can kind of lead to messy understanding or conclusion of one's experience. But I do think that because Michael is incredibly well read and versed in religion, all religion as well as our history, his coping and ultimate digestion of his situation is not without traces of our Christian heritage. He does a TED Talk, and he did a TED Talk in 2016, and he claims that he stayed alive because he was able to detach himself from his experience. He claims that laughter, and he says like religion, requires a certain level of detachment from oneself. And at first, I didn't really like the word detachment, but I spent some time with it, and I think what he just means is that's humility. It's not living in seriousness or certitude, but it's detaching yourself so that you can, allow other voices, other people to help you grow, help you engage with your current situation. And he even quotes G.K. Chesterton, and when he says, "Angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly," which I think is a great quote, but also just speaks to his experience. He was able to not sit in rage and hatred and look at his pirates and say, "You're evil, I'm not," and that's certain. But instead, he was able to engage with them or use his own personal background as a way to slowly allow him to move from anger to gratitude or from despair to forgiveness. And, he claims in this TED Talk that you cannot always be right. You cannot approach life with certitude and seriousness that limits your own worldview. And that's a lot of, what we've learned from theological reflection throughout our entire course. Whitehead and Killen and De Beers both speak of you can't always start at a standpoint of certitude. And ultimately, that's what he concludes. And so, how can we use this in a ministry takeaway or in a ministry setting? I can think of countless ways. Moore's process and conclusions really offer insight into our own Christian faith, but they also speak to just universal human truths that Christ taught. Joy can be found in the most dire circumstances. Our attitude and outlook on life has to come from a place of humility, looking beyond ourselves and our perspectives and allowing them to change. And ultimately, he found that there is a deep innate dignity of life, of every life. He saw that from the prisoners to the pirates to himself. And he saw that through forgiveness and gratitude. And so I can, just an example of how you could use this in a ministry right now, I just look at the division within our country. People live in certitude. They don't want to engage in other opinions. They don't want to engage in things that might cause them to change their mind or grow. But this is a great book of how, if you want to survive, if you want to live a joyful life, even in the most dire circumstances, you have to be prepared to do that. You have to be able to allow yourself to engage in a different opinion or a different religion or outlook on life and be willing to change, be willing to transform, be transformed by it. And so really I can see I think everyone should just read this book, but it'd be great for, an adult Bible study or for high schoolers who are about to go to college to learn, hey, you're going to engage in some other opinions and it's okay. Learn from them, let them transform you. So really, I think this was a wonderful book. I really enjoyed doing this, and I'm really engaged and intrigued with reflective believing as well. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.